What would Plant vs. Zombies fusion look like in the Plants vs. Zombies 2 art style? In this video, I will focus to changing the Plants fusion to PVZ2 style, and I will show you the speed paint of how I drew them, and I also honesty rate from 1 to 10. Before we proceed, YouTube algorithm said that 94.8% of my viewers are not subscribed. Therefore, please consider clicking that subscribe button. It will help me a lot. Number 1. Solar Nut. This fusion is a combination of solar nut and walnut. I began by placing a PVZ2 walnut as a base to get the right proportions and to use it for the body. After that, I started drawing the outline. For this outline, I traced the PVZ1 style but made the lines much cleaner. In this part, I added a base color to the leaves. Then I cleaned up the outlines I made and continued adding base colors to the petals and other leaves. After that, I added shadows to the petals, rendered them, and included highlights to give them more depth. I also changed the outline colors to match their base colors, but made them slightly darker to make the details stand out more. I almost forgot to add rendering to the leaves, so I added that as well. Then I adjusted some of the colors to improve the overall look and finalized the design. And there you have it, Solar Ember Nut in PVZ2 style. This one looks really cool, and I like how it turned out. I would rate this one an 8 out of 10. Number 2. Frost Shroom. This fusion is a combination of Perfume Shroom and Ice Shroom. I started by tracing the shape of Frost Shroom to get the proportions right and to match the PVZ2 style. After that, I began working on the head. For the head, I added a blue color to match the crystal ice look. I then added reflected light, followed by highlights and hard light to make the ice parts look shiny and cold. Once that was done, I moved on to the mushroom body. For the body, I used a sky blue color since I followed the Ice Shroom color palette. After that, I added shadows to give it depth, and then placed highlights to make it pop more. I made sure the shading matched the light source coming from the top left. Next, I worked on the face. I added the base colors for the eyes, face, and eyebrow. Then, I copied the icy base from Ice Shroom and placed it under Frost Shroom to give it that frozen ground effect. It made the whole fusion look more solid and cool. After placing everything, I changed the outline color to a lighter tone, especially around the icy parts, so the glow would stand out better. I then added a soft glow effect around the ice areas to make it feel colder and magical. Finally, I added small highlights to the eyes to bring it looks alive. I think this one turned out really good. The colors worked well together and the ice details made it look unique. I rate it 9 out of 10. Number 3. Torch Kelp. This fusion is a combination of Tangle Kelp and Torchwood. I started by placing a PVZ2 Tangle Kelp image to get the right proportions. After that, I traced the shape of Tangle Kelp to use as the base for the body. Next, I added the base colors. I used brown for the leaves and eyebrows, black for the head, and yellow for the eyes. Once the flat colors were done, I added highlights and reflected light on the leaves and eyebrows to make them stand out more. I added a glow effect to the eyes to give it that fire look. After that, I placed a soft light on the leaves to make it seem like the light was coming from the glowing eyes. Then I changed the color of the face to white, yellow, and orange to make it look like there was fire burning inside him. After that, I also added a yellow glow effect on the body, along with some fire particles around it to make it feel hotter and more powerful. I cleaned up the colors on the body and added more orange to give it a warmer tone. Then, I changed the outline color around the eyes and body to match the glow and make everything blend better. I think this fusion turned out really cool. The colors and glow made it feel like a fire version of Tangle Kelp. I rate this one 8.5 out of 10. Number 4. Chomp Nut. This fusion is a combination of Chomper and Walnut. I started by placing images of PVZ2 Walnut and Chomper side by side. I used Walnut as the main body, Then I cut out the mouth from Chomper and placed it on Walnut to give it a mouth. After that, I made the mouth larger so it overlapped the eyes. I erased the side of Walnut where the mouth was placed to make it fit better. I also erased the inner part of the mouth, including the tongue, so I could draw my own version. I drew the inside of the mouth with a base color and made the tongue much larger. Then, I removed Walnut's original eyes to focus more on the mouth. I cleaned up the cuts around the lips, sharpened the edges of the lips and teeth, and made everything smoother. Next, I changed the color of Walnut's body to violet. After that, I added shadows to the body to give it more depth. I also placed small details on the body to add more texture for extra parts. I added spikes and vines by copying them from Chomper. I placed them around the body to make it look more wild and dangerous. I also rendered the tongue to make it look wetter and more 3D. I kept rendering the plant more to bring out the volume and details. Then I added leaves on the back, which I took from Chomper's leaves. Lastly, I cleaned up the whole drawing and added shadows below the spikes to make them stand out more. This one looks really powerful and scary. It turned out great and feels like a true defense and attack combo. I rate it 9 out of 10. Number 5. Snow Repeater. This fusion is a combination of Snow Pea and Repeater. I started by placing images of PVZ2 Repeater and Snow Pea side by side. I used Repeater as the main base for the body. Next, I cut out the crystal ice from Snow Pea's head and placed it on top of Repeater. I added more ice crystals to make the top of the head look colder and sharper. All of the crystals I used came from Snow Pea. After placing them, I cleaned them up to make sure they fit well and looked smooth. Then, I traced the eyebrows from Repeater and kept them in place. After that, I started with the base color. I used a mix of sky blue and light blue to match the cold feeling of Snow Pea. Once the base was done, I added shadows under the eyebrows to give the face more depth. I made sure the shading matched the direction of the light to keep everything consistent. I think this one turned out really nice. It looks clean and sharp, and the extra ice details made it feel more like a true snow version of Repeater. I rate it 8 out of 10. Number 6. Bucket Shooter. This fusion is a combination of Peashooter and the bucket from the zombies. I started by adding an image of PVZ2 Peashooter and used it as the base for the drawing. I traced the whole Peashooter to get the right shape and details. After that, I edited the color and turned it into grayscale to give it a dull and metal-like look. Then, I added shadows to give it more depth and followed up with some lighting on the top parts to create contrast and form. Next, I added an image of the bucket zombie. I cut out the zombie and kept only the bucket. At first, I cut out just the bucket and left the handle. I placed the handle under the head of Peashooter to make it look like it was hanging from the body. Then I added red paint marks on the head and leaves of Peashooter to make it look like it was painted or damaged. But after checking the look, I changed my mind. I placed the full bucket on top of Peashooter's head instead, covering the leaves completely. It looked like he was wearing the bucket like a helmet or cup. I added shadows coming from the bucket to the face and head area so it looked like the bucket was casting shade over the Peashooter. I think this one turned out unique. I like how it turned out, so I rate it 10 out of 10. Number 7. Cherzilla. This fusion is a combination of Cherzilla and Cherry Chomper. I started by adding images of PVZ2 Tall Nut and Chomper to use as a guide. I adjusted the proportions to match how Cherzilla looks in the reference. Once I got the shape right, I traced the reference I made to get the basic outline. After that, I retraced the whole drawing to make the lines cleaner. This was for the final outline. Next, I added the base colors. I used red for the body and stem, green for the leaves, dirty white for the spikes and teeth, and a brownish yellow for the lips. After that, I started shading. I added shadows, darker shadows, highlights, and reflected light to the body and stem to make them look more 3D. I did the same process for the lips, adding depth and light on the upper parts. Then I worked on the mouth. I added a glow inside the mouth to make it look like there's energy inside. I also placed a small white eye inside to give it a cute but weird twist. Next, I added red details to the spikes and placed shadows under each one to show how they stick out. I also added shadows under the leaves. I used soft light and hard light on the leaves to give them a layered look, and added soft light to the spikes as well. For the lips, I added hard light to make them stand out more. After that, I cleaned the outline color to match the rest of the plant and make everything blend. Finally, I added darker shadows to the spikes to finish the rendering. I think this one turned out really nice. The look is scary but cute because of his smiling eyes. I rate it 10 out of 10. Number 8. Dominator Shroom. This fusion is a combination of Twinkle Shroom and Cryonic Shroom. I started by tracing the shape of Dominator Shroom to get the right form. Then, I added Perfume Shroom's eyes to help make the eye proportions look better and more balanced. After that, I moved on to the base colors. I used a blue-violet tone for the main body. For the crystals on his head, I added blue light to give them an icy and glowing effect. I also added a gradient of violet to each crystal to make them look more dynamic and magical. Next, I placed some blue reflected light around the crystals to help them blend with the rest of the head. I added shadows to the head area that holds the crystals to show the weight and depth of the parts. Then, I added a soft violet light to all the crystals and layered it with more blue light on the sharper edges. To finish the crystals, I used an airbrush to add soft lighting, then placed hard white light on the crystal tips to make them look extra shiny. I changed the color of the body to a less saturated blue-violet to make it feel colder. I added shadows to the body, and on top of that, I placed line textures to make the surface more detailed. I followed up with soft light and hard light effects to bring more volume to the body. Then I worked on the eyes. I added the base colors and shadows on the eyelids. I also made the eyes glow to give him a more powerful and mysterious look. Lastly, I added some small details around the face and body to complete the design. I think this one turned out really cool and sick. Therefore, I rate it a solid 10 out of 10. Number 9. Gatling Doom. This fusion is a combination of Gatling P and Doom Shroom. I started by adding an image of PVZ2 Gatling P as the base for the drawing. I turned the whole image into grayscale to give it a dark and lifeless look. After that, I made the head area darker to match the feel of Doom Shroom. I restored the color of the helmet to bring back some of its original look, but I added a cracked effect to make it look damaged. Inside the crack, I placed a glowing red light to make it feel like something dangerous is inside. I also added red details around the helmet to make it more intense. Next, I added a line texture to the body, similar to what Doom Shroom has, to give it that mushroom-like surface. Then I moved on to the eyes. I first cut out the eyes from Doom Shroom and replaced them over Gatling P's eyes, but it didn't look quite right. So I decided to redraw the eyes instead. The new version looked much better and fit the fusion more naturally. Then I added shadows under the helmet to give the face more depth and to show that the helmet was casting a shadow. For the final touch, I added more red details to the body to bring out the Doom Shroom energy. I think this one turned out really strong. It has a scary and powerful look that fits both plants well. I rated 9 out of 10. Number 10. Twinkle Shroom. This fusion is a combination of Puff Shroom and Starfruit. I started by adding images of PVZ2 Puff Shroom and Starfruit, but I only used them as color reference for the drawing. Then, I traced the original shape of Twinkle Shroom to get the right proportions. After that, I traced the eyes and changed the mouth to make it look more like Starfruit's happy expression. Next, I added an orange gradient to the edges of the star to give it a glowing and soft look. I placed shadows on the darker parts of the star to make the shape pop more. After that, I added a soft light to the star and followed it with hard light on the edges to give it more shine. I also drew a simple line in between the arms of the star shape to define its form better. Then I moved on to the face. I colored the eyes and added highlights and shadows under the mouth and around the edges of the eyes to make them stand out. After that, I started rendering the whole body to clean up the details and make everything smoother. For the final touch, I added a small white to bring extra sparkle to the design. I think this one turned out really cute and shiny. The colors and face made it feel cheerful and bright. I rate it 10 out of 10. Number 11. Chrono Peashooter. This fusion is a combination of Peashooter and Time Shard. I started by adding a PVZ2 image of Peashooter and edited the colors to light blue and grayscale. This gave it a cooler and more robotic feel. After that, I erased the grayscale part of the body, leaving only the leaves, since Chrono Peashooter has gray leaves. I changed the right side of the leaves to dark blue to give it more contrast. Then, I removed the leaves on top of his head and replaced them by drawing an ear shape, similar to what Chrono P has. I added a base color using gray and grayish blue to keep the color theme consistent. I also drew another ear on the back side to make it symmetrical. Next, I added a soft glow to the mouth to make it look like it was powered by some kind of energy. I added shadow to the back ear to separate it from the head and placed both hard shadow and soft shadow on the front ear to add depth. I also added highlights to the front ear to show the direction of light, and then added a shadow below the ears on the head to ground the shapes better. I think this one turned out clean and futuristic. The color mix and ear design made it feel like a true time-powered plant. I rate it 8 out of 10. Number 12. Golden Garlic. This fusion is a combination of silver garlic and coffee bean. I started by adding a PVZ2 image of garlic to use as the base. I carefully traced the outline to match the shape and proportions. After that, I added the base color. I used a yellow and orange gradient to give it a shiny, golden look. Then I added shadows in specific areas, following where the shadows naturally appear on garlic's body. Next, I placed hard highlights on the upper parts to give the surface a polished shine. I also added reflected light around the edges to make it look more metallic. I added a shadow under the mouth to help separate it from the body. Then I moved on to the face. I colored the eyes and made the teeth white. I also added the base color to the eyebrows and then placed shadows on them to match the lighting. For the final touch, I changed the outline color to match the golden tones of the body, making the whole drawing look smoother and more finished. I think this one turned out really bright and shiny. The gold look fits the name, and the highlights made it stand out. I rated 8 out of 10. Number 13. Perfume Shroom. This fusion is a combination of Fume Shroom and Hypno Shroom. I started by adding a PVZ2 image of Fume Shroom to use as the base. I carefully traced the shape to get a clean outline. After that, I changed the eyes and mouth to match the look of Hypno Shroom. This gave it a more hypnotic and dreamy expression. Then I moved on to coloring. I used Hypno Shroom's color palette for the base. I added a mix of blue, sky blue, green, yellow, and white. I placed the colors randomly across the body, then blended them into a gradient to make everything flow nicely. Next, I added a glow around the outline, just like how Hypno Shroom has. I placed soft light over the whole body to give it a more 3D look. I also added small glowing dots on the head to give it a magical effect. Then I shaded the shooting hole by adding a soft shadow. I also added shadows to the lower parts of the body and some light on the top to balance it out. I changed the color of the eyes to match the new palette and made the mouth a darker pink to give it more contrast. For the final touch, I changed the outline color to match the glow and make everything blend better. I think this one turned out very colorful and dreamy. The glowing effects and color mix made it feel like a powerful support shroom. I rate it 10 out of 10. Number 14. Magnetar. I began by importing the images of Magnet Shroom and Starfruit, then combined them to fit the body of Magnetar. I also used an image as a guide to trace a perfect outline. This method skips the sketching phase and goes straight to outlining. At this point, I started outlining the star shape. Then I moved on to the eyes. I simply copied Magnetar's original eyes, and I did the same for his mouth. Next, I began outlining the magnet. I adjusted it slightly to the left to make it more accurate. After that, I added a leaf to Starfruit's right arm to improve the design, and I outlined all the leaves. The small star on his head comes later, after I finish coloring the body. Now, I started coloring the body red, like Magnetar's original color. Then I added a blue touch to the corners of the star. I made sure there was a smooth transition between colors, just like how Starfruit blends red and blue. Also, if you notice, Starfruit in PVZ2 has shadows, unlike PVZ1. So, I added shadows to Magnetar in the PVZ2 style. I carefully added them to create a smooth transition and blend. Starfruit also has a dark line in a certain part, so I added that to Magnetar as well. The line has a soft blend at the end, which I also recreated to match the base color. I noticed the color looked a bit flat, so I added lighting to make it look slightly 3D. I placed a lighter color in the middle of his face, based on Starfruit's design. I also added highlights and reflective light to enhance the 3D look. Next, I worked on the eyes. I started by adding the base color. If you're wondering why I didn't use the bucket tool, it's because I prefer doing it manually. It feels more satisfying. Then I added the blue pupil and shadows to both the eye and tooth. I added small details inside the pupil, followed by Magnetar's adorable blue freckles. Before that, I colored the leaves red. And then moved on to coloring the magnets. Afterward, I carefully added shadows to the magnets for balance and added light spots on both the magnets and the leaves. I also added secondary shadows and then highlights to the magnets to make them shine. I included a soft sky blue reflective light on the magnet as well and blended the leaf color with the body to keep that natural blue tone. I almost forgot to add rendering on the face, so I added shadows and lighting to match the PVZ2 art style. Then, I cleaned up the outlines so the body would look even better. As I mentioned earlier, I added the star on his head after finishing the body. I drew the star outline, filled it with a sky blue base color, and then added a darker blue for the shadow side, just like on the body. Then I added highlights on the edges and a lighter blue glow in the center. Finally, I cleaned up the outline color. Lastly, I added glow and details. And there you have it. Magnetar, but in PVZ2 style. I like how it turned out. The original is naturally cool, but this version is a lot cleaner, simple, detailed, and high definition. I rated 9 out of 10. Number 15, Torch 3. A 3-headed torchwood. I started by creating the reference. After that, I proceeded to make the outline by tracing over the reference, and then I improved it by adding eyes and mouths to the other 2 heads. Next, I chose a brown color similar to torchwood and used it as the base color for the body. Then, I selected a darker brown by adjusting the color wheel slightly toward red. I used this darker color to add shadows to the parts that the light doesn't hit, usually the areas opposite the light source. For example, on a cube, if the light hits one side, the shadow appears on the opposite side. We apply the same logic in our drawing to make it look more 3D. Moving on, I picked a color slightly lighter than the shadow for secondary shadows, also known as the midtone. Then I selected an even lighter brown for the wood highlights. I placed these highlights on the upper parts of the face, especially around the eyebrow area and along some cracks in the wood. Next, I added a more saturated brown for the reflective light, which comes from the fire's glow. I then colored his lips with a lighter brown, just like in Torchwood's original design. I also added yellow to some parts of the wood that are strongly lit by the fire. Then I started coloring the eyes yellow, just like in the reference, and also colored the teeth. I added red to the pupils and put shadows on the eyes and teeth to enhance the depth and detail. After that, I colored the fire yellow and added white spots to the flame, just like in Torchwood. Next, I removed the outline from the fire to make it look more natural, and I added glow effects around the edges of the fire to give it that soft, fiery look. Finally, this is the look of Torch Tree in PVZ2 art style. This one is much better. I also like it, so I rate it 9 out of 10. Number 16. Golden Kelp. I used the PVZ2 Tangle Kelp as a reference for the body. I started by tracing the body to create the outline for our golden kelp. Then, I removed the reference and began applying the base color. I chose a not-so-saturated yellow as the base and carefully filled it in. Next, I picked a slightly more saturated orange to use for the shadows. I followed the same shadow style as Tangle Kelp. If you look closely, its shadows aren't solid but smoothly blended with the midtones. This type of soft shadow works well on wavy, flat surfaces like the tentacle-like leaves of Tangle Kelp. Then, I used a normal airbrush to add small, subtle shadows to increase contrast and depth. After that, I moved on to coloring the lighter parts of the leaves. I blended the light areas carefully, just like I did with the shadows. But then I realized it didn't look like gold yet. So, I added more highlights, since gold is very shiny. I added white highlights to give it a glowing effect. Then came my favorite part of coloring gold. I added reflective light to both the shadowed and light areas of the gold. This really made it pop. Next, I carefully added black to the face area, following the original look of Tangle Kelp. For the eyes, I chose a glowing yellow color because it looks cool and matches the golden theme. For the final touch, I changed the color of the outline to make it look cleaner. And this is the final result. I really like how it turned out. As you can see, it looks much better than the original. So, I'd rate this one a 10 out of 10. Number 17. Calamity Shroom. Calamity Shroom is a one-time use plant made by fusing Cursed Shroom and Doom Shroom. When used, it explodes in a 7x7 area, dealing heavy damage. I began by creating the reference. I removed the hat from Hypno Shroom and replaced it with Doom Shroom's head. My idea was to copy the curl on top of Doom Shroom's head, just like in the original. Then I traced the reference and added curled branches on his head. I also placed an X on his head and changed the eyes to match the original Calamity Shroom. After that, I started coloring the body with a gray tone. For the head, I chose black and used Doom Shroom's color palette as a guide. Next, I added line textures to the face, because Doom Shroom also has that kind of texture and I wanted to match it. Then I added shadows to the face to make it look a bit more three-dimensional. I followed that by adding light to the head. I also used hard lighting on the face to enhance the texture. And then added hard lighting to the head as well. After that, I colored the curl and the X on the head in red. I made sure to blend them properly to keep everything looking clean. I also added some reflected red light on the face to make it look cooler. For the final touch, I added a glow effect and cleaned up the outline. And there you have it, a Plants vs. Zombies 2 style version of Calamity Shroom. I liked how it turned out, but the transformation felt more like small changes. So I would rate this one an 8 out of 10. Number 18. Scorchweed. Scorchweed is a spikeweed fusion plant created from jalapeno and spikeweed. When zombies step on it, It pops tires and applies an inflamed debuff that increases all damage they receive by 50%. I began by making the reference, but unfortunately, my recording had an error. So instead, I made some changes directly to the drawing. I gave both eyes an angry expression, added green spikes to the body, and changed the whole body color to red. I lowered the visibility of the reference so I could add an outline. For the outline, I simply traced what I had drawn on the reference. Next, I colored the entire body red to serve as the base color. Then I carefully added blended shadows to give the design more contrast and depth. After that, I added highlights to the bump on his head to make it stand out. I also included his eyebrows and colored them slightly brighter so they would pop. I moved on to coloring the eyes. And I added shadows under the eyes because that part is not directly hit by the light. I also added shadows to all the spikes and again to the eyes and body, making sure to blend everything carefully. Then I used a slightly darker color on the spikes to increase contrast. Next, I added highlights to the spikes to make them more defined. After that, I colored the eyes green and also colored some of the spikes green, just like in the original Scorchweed design. Lastly, I cleaned up the outline, and now we have Scorchweed in PVZ2 style. I really like how this one turned out. If you compare it to the original, you can clearly see the big differences and how much better this version looks. So I would rate this a 10 out of 10. Number 19. Lumina Magnet. Lumina Magnet, also known as Magnetar Shroom, is a common fusion plant created by combining Magnetar Shroom and Plantforms. It periodically attracts metal from zombies and nearby magnetic sources. I began by taking the magnet from Magnetar Shroom. Then, I used Torchwood's body for the main shape, just like in the original design. After that, I added leaves on the corners to match the reference more closely. Once that was done, I traced the reference and revealed the outline I had drawn. I started applying the base colors. I used Torchwood's color palette for the magnets and the wood part of the body. For the mushroom part, I copied the color from the original Dominator Shroom. Of course, I used green for the leaves. Next, I added shadows to the wooden body. Then I shaded the mushroom part as well. I used the airbrush tool to blend the shadows and add contrast. I also added shadows to the magnets. After that, I applied lighting to the magnets using a slightly lighter brown. For the leaves, I added yellow-green highlights. I gave the mushroom part a large white highlight to make it shine. Then I added highlights to the wooden body and also included reflected light to give it more depth. I added light to the edges of the eyes. For the top of the head, I used a yellow color since that part is glowing. At first, the highlights were not strong enough, so I added more to make the glowing effect stand out. Then I added small details like the dots on the magnets and the spots on the mushroom. I added lighting to both eyes and some reflective light to make them look like they are glowing. For the final touch, I changed the outline to a lighter color and added a soft glow. And there you have it, a Plants vs. Zombies 2 style version of Dominator Shroom. Now it is your turn. You be the judge. How would you rate it from 1 to 10? Number 20. Cherry Bomber. Cherry Bomber, also known as Explodo Shooter, is a super fusion plant created by fusing Cherry Shooter and Cherry Bomb. As always, I started by making a reference. From there, I created the outline. As you can see, I changed the eyes to match Cherry Bomb's eyes to make it look cooler. After finishing the outline, I colored the body using Cherry Bomb's color palette. I also added color to both eyes and to the second head. At this point, I was a bit lazy to draw the leaves, so I took the leaves from Cherry Bomb by removing its body. For the bottom leaves, I used the ones from Peashooter. You may notice I didn't follow the reference I made earlier because it seemed off. Cherry Bomb has a stem at the bottom, so I thought that design would work better. Then I changed the color of the leaves to match the green from the top leaves, so everything would look more balanced. Next, I started adding shadows to the stem. I continued by carefully adding shadows to the main head, including the area around the eyebrows. Then I added shadows to the second head as well. To add more depth, I used the airbrush tool to place soft shadows, since the drawing was looking a bit flat. Then I colored both pupils green. I also colored the mouth pure black. To make the face pop, I added highlights to both heads and included some light on the pupils too. After that, I added a color transition to the stem because it looked too plain in solid red. The transition helped make the color more natural. For the final touch, I changed the outline color to something cleaner and more fitting. And there we have it, Cherry Bomber in PVZ2 style. I really like this one because I changed the stem placement, and I think it looks much better than the original. So I give this one a solid 10 out of 10. That is all for today's video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. See ya.